Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Beck Jordan-Young, Director of the Barnard Center for Research on Women, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to We Will Not Be Erased, Queer Archives, Trans Histories, featuring Tourmaline and Steven Watson. I want to start by offering a few notes on accessibility and gratitude, starting with a land acknowledgement. Tonight's event is taking place online, but we are all physically located somewhere, and we recognize that all land is Indigenous land. Barnard College is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lenape people. Events like this only come together through the work of many people. I want to begin by thanking the BCRW staff, Nico Wright, Pamela Phillips, Hope Decter, Sandra Moyano Ariza, Tracy Phoenix, and Margot Kotler. Thank you also to our ASL interpreters, Kathy and Michelle, and our co-sponsors, the Department of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies and the Barnard Archives. Now a word about academic freedom. BCRW is an academic research center operating under principles of academic freedom. Speakers and participants in BCRW events and publications express their own views, which do not necessarily reflect the views of Barnard College. We enthusiastically welcome the ways they expand our world through creative and visionary contributions to feminist knowledge across time spans and disciplines. We're planning for tonight's event to take place for 1.5 hours, ending around 8. It'll be probably 8:05 Eastern time because of our late start. If you have a question for the speakers, you can type it in the YouTube chat. We'll be collecting any questions there for the Q&A that will take place towards the end of the discussion. To post a question, you will need to sign in to YouTube. Note, too, that we're going to be showing some film clips tonight to make space for the voices of people who are in the archives, and we'll have those special guests introduced later. We're so proud to welcome back our longtime collaborator, Tourmaline, tonight. A Guggenheim Fellow, a Time 100 honoree, and the recipient of too many prizes to name. Tourmaline is an artist, filmmaker, and national best-selling author whose work spans high art and pop culture. Tourmaline's art is in the permanent collections of the Met, MoMA, Tate, and the Whitney, and has been showcased in both the Venice Biennale and the Whitney Biennial. Her award-winning films have been widely recognized for their unique blend of historical narrative and speculative futurism. Tourmaline's art centers pleasure, possibility, and transformation. A former leader of the trans health campaign at the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, Tourmaline has built a career rooted in community organizing and trans liberation, and is a transformative voice in movements for racial, economic, and gender justice. We're especially proud that Tourmaline was one of the first activist fellows at BCRW, and we cherish that connection. We're also honored and delighted to be joined tonight by Dr. Steven Watson, founder and president of Artifacts, an online platform dedicated to preserving pioneering queer, avant-garde, and downtown voices, and the focus of tonight's event. Interviews with Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, Holly Woodlawn, and Quentin Crisp are part of this archive, and tonight we'll have the privilege of watching several of these clips from it with Steven and Tourmaline. Artifacts is a culmination of many years of Steven working as a cultural historian and documentary filmmaker, dealing with the dynamics of 20th century avant-garde. After studying English at Stanford and earning a PhD in psychology at UC Santa Barbara, he worked for 20 years as a staff psychologist in community mental health. At that same time, he began writing books about cultural pioneers of the 20th century, from New York Dada and Greenwich Village Bohemia to the Harlem Renaissance, the Beat Generation, and Andy Warhol's Factory. In connection to his writings, Watson organized 2 exhibitions at the National Portrait Gallery. He also published a collaborative artist portfolio, Artifacts at the End of a Decade, which is in the collections of the world's leading museums, and directed a documentary film about the opera Four Saints in 3 Acts, broadcast on PBS. In all his work, Steven is interested in the overlapping circles that move American culture forward and the prominent role played by queer pioneers. Before we turn in proper to the conversation, I want to speak a bit about the series this event is part of, our We Will Not Be Erased, Queer Archives Trans Histories series, which encompasses Tourmaline's McIntyre lecture on her biography of Marsha P. Johnson, which was given in November at Barnard, now available on our YouTube page, tonight's event, and also a documentary film project. This spotlights the urgent work of preserving and celebrating trans life, creativity, and resistance. I think everyone joining us tonight likely knows the urgency of supporting trans people and trans communities in the face of escalating political attacks, public violence, intensified efforts to restrict healthcare, censor histories, and legislate trans people out of public life. With this series, we affirm BCRW's longstanding commitment to trans liberation, cultural memory, and the building of life-sustaining futures. The centerpiece of this initiative is Tourmaline and Hope Decter's forthcoming documentary on Marsha P. Johnson's early life. Blending restored archival material, original footage, and personal testimonies from Marsha's living relatives and community members, the film paints a personal portrait of who Marsha was before she became the icon we know today. As Tourmaline and Hope move toward the film's completion, we invite all of you, our community of scholars, activists, students, artists, and supporters, to partner with us in bringing this history into the world. So I'd like to invite everyone watching to consider whether you can give some extra funds tonight, or when you can, if not tonight, to support this film. Your support helps ensure that stories like Marsha's are not only preserved, but placed at the center of public consciousness and cultural memory. If you're able to contribute, the donation link in the chat will take you to our giving page. And now I'm delighted to dive into this conversation with Tourmaline and Steven.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Tourmaline.
Hi, thank you for having us.
So I'm sorry, I have to switch screens to look at something tonight. Excuse me. We're going to see, and I'm not sure if we're seeing the Artifacts website, are we?
Yes.
Fantastic. So, Steven, what is Artifacts? Tell me what it's for and who it's for. Can you tell us how it came into being?
Okay. So, of course, this is a culmination of years of interviews and research and doing work on my book and so forth. But in the past 3 years, we've founded a nonprofit and really began to organize it. And when I say we, I have a real team of Will Markarian-Martin and Pablo Eguia and Oel Knebikov and others to, in a sense, bring an archive into accessible use by people, and also to make it attractive, visually attractive, very accessible, and using, in a sense, using the interviews to bring the viewers into a larger world. Because it's not only one life; they are deeply embedded in social collectives, and whether that's clubs or salons or various things. And if possible, Hope, if you could show the John Kelly sociogram. A sociogram, what this is, you're seeing John Kelly, who is a performance artist. And these animations give you a sense, first of all, of how he worked, particularly in the East Village, in the downtown clubs, ranging from PS1 and Club 57 to the Pyramid Club. The Pyramid Club is really a focus of where trans people and punk and performance came together in the 80s, particularly, and into the 90s. And that included people like Lady Bunny and very early RuPaul and Noni. So you see, he is connected to something, but it's actually the communal sense of the group. Um, and you can see here both the breadth of his involvement, but also you get the sense of intergenerational thing.
Yeah.
Because the pyramid people are really, it's after the Warhol trio, it's after Hot Peaches, it's and it ushers in RuPaul. There's as Tourmaline can attest, there's many different phases of the performance, drag and trans performance world. So this is a way of organizing that, and we can, I think, get rid of that now.
But it's really cool. Thank you for showing it.
So, yeah.
This is how I think. I mean, it's really about putting out on paper how people are connected to one another. And it's really about how transmitted. So the hope for Artifacts is that it is an introduction. It's a seductive introduction. It's an attractive introduction, but it's also quite deep, and the sense that you hear about people. Sometimes you have transcripts. This is an attempt to go beyond that and really show how people talk. And illustrations of the things that they helped create.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing.
In brief, it's for more than just researchers. And the idea of bringing the archive into the open, into the internet. Archives, I love archives, but they have their limitations unless you really know how to use them. So that's all I'll say right now.
That's great. I'll ask one other question, Steven, of you before I turn to Tourmaline, and that's just, I'd like to know how much of Artifacts came through intentional archival methods, and maybe you could put that together with the question of, like, how did you start doing this? Was it just because, maybe if you take us back to the first moment and talk about how you were doing this, was it proximity? Were you really intentionally trying to document? Was it just being part of the community?
Right. Well, the sense of a long-term goal, it was not there. I would say there's always an interest in documenting people's lives on tape, and perhaps the first one was interviewing my grandfather about his growing up. And I certainly, for example, the Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera tape, those were done on the 10th anniversary of Stonewall. I knew that it was important to document that, and created a zine about that. But I had, of course, had no idea that Marsha would become the figure she is today. And it was I published probably the first big article about Marsha in the Village Voice in 1979. But there was a kind of aha moment when I was researching a book about the opera Four Saints and Three Acts, and I gathered together the living members of the all-black cast from 1934, and it was a really moving moment interviewing them, and I realized what comes through is not just in words. It's in this should be a documentary, and I knew nothing about making a documentary, and I also knew by the time I did that they all would be dead. So at that moment, I said, shoot people when they're alive, capture these voices. You will figure out later what to do with them, and that has become uh, a very important aspect of uh, of artifacts as it continues. We're actively continuing to interview new people.
That's great. So, Tourmaline, what does it mean to you to be, as a researcher, to be able to use this resource today? Have you?
Yeah, I mean, it is such a um, profound act of generosity that Steven is sharing with the world. So, Marsha, my book, really wouldn't exist without Steven's.
Uh-oh. We've lost.
Can you hear me?
Back. Yeah, now we can.
Okay, great. So I was saying, Marsha, my book wouldn't exist without Steven's archival work. It was such a powerful moment to listen to contextualize this. I had been kind of researching and writing about Marsha for about 15 years before I started writing the book in 2020. And it was such a profound moment to listen to Steven's interview with Marsha as they are in the bagel shop that had replaced Stonewall, and Marsha's digging through her too much mayonnaise potato salad and talking profoundly and poetically about having to perform with all of her looks in a locker in Penn Station and make a way out of no way, and what it means to have access to a house, in a home, in an apartment as a performer, and what it means to witness Christopher Street change over time in ways that she's both celebrated and deeply unwelcome. And so it is, and I also got chills because Marsha sings to Steven the Hot Peach song, the trolley song that Jimmy Camicia wrote, that I had only ever seen written down in Jimmy Camicia's book and his memoir. And so, one other thing I'll say too is that and we're going to dig into it more later, but we also know Sylvia Rivera as a very important organizer and activist. But what is so profound too about the conversation Steven had with Sylvia was Sylvia talking about witnessing Marsha perform. And I don't think there's a single other place that I've ever, found Sylvia describing Marsha's performance. And so there's just so many layers and levels that this project offers.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I think we're going to show a clip now of Marsha, right? Let's move to that.
Gordon Taylor and did my face at Walmart.
Really?
I got all these new. I got this new thing where I go to all different department stores and do my facial.
Really?
Yes.
How do you do that?
You walk around and try on all the makeup. I put my own mirror. And I just walk around and try on all the makeup.
Oh, that's fabulous.
I don't know they couldn't arrest you for that either.
Do they try to
push you along?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
They said, you can't try on the makeup here. I thought, really. But those women get very jealous.
You think they're jealous of the way you look?
They're always jealous of their characters. Like,
Uh-huh.
That's amazing. That's fabulous. So, Stephen, oh wait, I'm so sorry. I wanted to ask you. Let me ask you now. I was going to ask you before if there was something you wanted us to listen to in particular about the context of that, even though it's after the fact. Why don't I ask you now?
Well, I just, it's very interesting what you do to get an interview. And I had known Marsha through contact with the Hot Peaches, which ends up being a very, very important theater group. But being able to arrange an interview with Marsha when she has no home, and it was really about hanging out at the Silver Dollar, which was a Christopher Street coffee shop, very well known at the period. But that whole process of getting the interview with someone who has no fixed residence, and just I just love the ingenuity and the bravado.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's amazing. And maybe you've said all you wanted to say about this, but I wanted to ask, how did this one particular interview, you said that you were hanging around with getting to know the Hot Peaches. Was there something about this particular event that you remember?
Oh, well, at this point, I knew I was going to write something for the Village Voice. So it was about the 10th anniversary of Stonewall.
Oh, great. Cool.
But
so Tourmaline
of Marsha being one of the really key figures around the Hot Peaches, and my recognizing that.
Yeah. Great. So Tourmaline, when you first encountered this footage and other footage of Marsha, how did it change your understanding of her life and her world?
Yeah, I mean, I think so many particular ways, but so I wrote a chapter in the book that was really solely about Marsha as artist. And I think that's really important for people to understand. Marsha was a seasoned activist and organizer and deeply committed. But one of the important parts of Marsha's life that was central to the way that she was in the world was being an incredible performer. And, the connection with the Hot Peaches and also Marsha was also in the Angels of Light, and the ways that Marsha talked to Steven about performance and just being able to, okay, so I don't know if anyone listens to Ariana Grande, but like back in the day, she did a radio interview, in the report, the interviewer was just like, oh, do you want to like sing right now? And she just like goes off on something. And in a similar fashion, it's like, you can tell when someone is preparing a space for someone to show off the cuff the best version of who they are, and the best version of who Marsha was showing up in that moment that Steven prepared space for was her just singing and going off the cuff in this impromptu way that is just so powerful. And then also, talking about the real life of being an artist in New York City in this moment without access to stable housing. And I think that is a really important aspect. Marsha in the interview was talking about living in the baths. And, this is, the interview immediately precedes the emergence of the HIV/AIDS crisis, right? And so much right after the interview of the landscape, immediately changes, whether it's the the Anvil where Marsha is hanging out, or just so many of the spaces that make up her day to day. And I think it's really powerful to have a conversation where Marsha's, mapping out the geography of her life in specificity.
Cool. I think we have another clip that
Yes,
we're going
sorry,
to
I
move
was supposed
on
to
right
introduce
that we want to. Stephen, do you want to introduce? I think we're going to talk about Sylvia a little bit, right?
Okay. Well, and feel free to jump in, Tourmaline. But
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sylvia is an amazingly important activist in the early gay movement, particularly about trans issues. And with Marsha, she founded the Star House. And Star stands for Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. And this was a communal house that housed many people. And it was a kind of an asylum place. And Sylvia, I think, doesn't get quite as much attention as Marsha. She was more abrasive. Marsha, you could not help but kind of fall in love with. The sunniness, the ebullience, just the character. But Sylvia, and when I interviewed Sylvia, none of the abrasiveness was there. It was really about the love of Marsha and the love of being interviewed. And she was very forthcoming. So this piece is just a little bit about a very tangible sense of her affection for Marsha. And I think it's coming right now.
What do you think is it that makes Marsha so unique?
She does not give a fuck about nothing. Nothing will stop her.
Mm-hmm.
No one can say nothing to her.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I like about Marsha, and I think that's why she's so unique, and her voice.
Uh-huh.
Well, honey, my name is Marsha P. Johnson, and the P stands for Piola. That's the name I used to give her. Because I used to ask her, what's the P for? She said, I don't know, it just sounds good. I said, okay, Piola, that will be your name now.
She told me last night it was for Pay It No Mind.
But the change.
Yeah, no, she said
Pay it no mind. Well, that's her too, because she pays nothing no more.
Yeah, that's right.
I have seen Marsha take her last money and feed her dogs and cats short ribs and stuff while she was starving, because she said a dumb animal can't fend for himself, and I can get out on the block and get it for her. This is Marsha.
Uh-huh.
And you tell her you need some money, and if she has it, she'll give it to you. And I mean,
I love especially that last part about giving money to her dog to feed her animals.
Yeah, and there's a part in this interview, Stephen, where you just bring out Sylvia's, there's such a smile in her throat when she talks about feeding people, like at the Weinstein Hall NYU takeover. Sylvia says in a tone that, and I've watched so many interviews with Sylvia says, and then we call chow and everybody eats. And she's just so happy, like she has this joy and exuberance, and it makes so much sense that it comes also with a layer of, like rage of the condition. She was 12 years old when she moved to Times Square and started hustling. And also she talks about that in such detail in the interview with you about the reality of Times Square. And that's such an important part.
Yes. Sylvia was very real.
That's right.
Beck, we're not hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just see what happened.
Now we hear you.
Now you hear me?
Yeah, now we
Okay.
hear you. Yeah.
Great. I wondered, I mean, maybe you could speak right now. You're talking about how real Sylvia was. And, you know, a lot of people know something about Sylvia's role in trans history. But what do you think, like, her particular personality perspective, what does that bring to us at this moment in history?
Tourmaline, why don't you speak to that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that we're looking at harsh conditions at a level that that the founders of Star were navigating at the time, right? Like, in New York, when Sylvia and Marsha were coming up in Times Square, you could be arrested as a trans person just by going outside, right? And wearing clothing that was associated with your gender identity. In the US right now, we're seeing, whether it's Kansas, trans people's driver's license being taken away, or Idaho, which just passed, you know, it's like you could go on and on and on about each new piece of legislation. But what, you know, is so urgent is, one, people saying, like, when is enough, right? Like, this real demand for the escalating conditions and violences to stop, and also to turn to each other as sources of support and resource, which is what, you know, was a through line for Steven's interviews with both Sylvia and Marsha, of like, how are we showing up for each other? Yes, the horrible things are happening, but how are we also showing up for each other in this moment? And so, to me, I think those are the lessons that are you know, really important.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think that's right. So, you know, I'm wondering about, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to let y'all know that I lost one of my screens for a minute, so I skipped a clip that I wanted to show before. But you tell me, do you want to move on to talking about some folks in Hot Peaches, or do you want to go back to that another clip from somebody else talking about Marsha's makeup, which is pretty cool, Augusto?
Let's do it. I mean,
want to go back? Let's do that, and we'll jump ahead. I love it. Yeah, let's do it. So can we have that first Augusto clip, Hope?
Okay.
Tell me about that time Marsha took you to Macy's.
Oh, yes. Marsha got invited to a party that was north of 14th Street, which meant like a high-class party where we would go and drag. But we didn't have sufficient funds, but we could get the drag. So she said, girlfriend, we're going to Macy's. And I said, Macy's is on 34th Street. That's uptown. And she said, pay it no mind. We're going to Macy's. And she walked right up to the makeup counter. And it was disarming because the young women behind the counters obviously knew we weren't wearing semi-drag. And she said, we'd like to test your makeup. Can you show something that would be appropriate? So Marsha asked about the different things, and they were so cooperative. They were a little overwhelmed, and she worked on Marsha, eyeshadow, eyeliner, highlights, and lipstick. And she said, okay, do my girlfriend now. And another one came over. He said, well, her coloring is different. I think she needs a different base. And I couldn't believe it that people were surreptitiously looking or staring. And the makeover was amazing. I wish there was a before and after. Marsha looked so terrific. And then I looked in the mirror and I didn't believe it was me. And she said, now, thank you very much. We'll consider this makeup and perhaps come back.
So that's Augusto Machado, who Steven has known for a very long time. So I'm going to add, but the interview comes from the film that Hope and I are working on. So I'm going to ask Steven to share who is Augusto.
So Augusto he's almost a Zelig-like figure of the downtown performance world. And And again, I met him through the Hot Peaches connections. Augusto attended every performance that of everyone. He was the biggest supporter of the theater world and the performance world. He was remarkably without ego. This is one thing that really stood out. He always he was an archivist of his own sort. He would always say, really, I'm a hoarder. But he lived in a fairly modest apartment, and it was filled totally with materials. And something that's very interesting about Augusto is he was known below 14th Street within a very specific circle. But in the last 3 or 4 years, suddenly he's become known as an artist, and that's because he put together the artifacts and the ephemera and all of the little things that he had kept for over the years, and created altars to the people that he revered. And the Gordon Robichaud Gallery began to see the value of these as art and showed them. And suddenly, and I think, Augusto was not prepared for this. He's in the Museum of Modern Art. He's currently in the Whitney Biennial.
Wow.
The obituary in the New York Times was almost a full page. Someone who did not expect to be recognized in his lifetime, nor did he try. I mean, that was not his motive, but it was very interesting to see how that happened. And it really could not have happened to a better person.
That's right.
And on Artifacts, we're working on doing a segment on Augusto for June. And I've discovered like 4 hours of interviews, audio interviews I did in 1981. That's about 45 years ago. And it's fascinating to see what his character was like then and now, and it's remarkably consistent. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it's actually a good place to keep going and talk a little bit more. We've got another clip with somebody else from the Hot Peaches, right? Do you want to talk about Jimmy, or maybe Steven, could you introduce the clip?
Sure. So, okay. So what we're seeing is the Skirball Center at NYU did an exhibition of the Hot Peaches, and I was at a program. I was interviewing Jimmy, and the importance of the Hot Peaches was really one of the first theater groups that tried to speak in gay language and really embrace trans people, although it was by no means specific to that. It was political, but it was very funny. It was very musical. It was a combination of cabaret and hanging out in the loft, and there's really highly permeable border between the audience and the people on stage. It was the opposite of Broadway theater. So here I asked him about first meeting Marsha, and he will again mention the famous Silver Dollar Cafe. So here we go.
I never saw anything that looked like this. Flowers all over the place, clothes that looked like they came out of the garbage, men's shoes just there. And she sees the kid crying and she goes, "Oh, Joey, what's the matter?" tittles over to Joey. He explains. He said, last night I got mugged. They broke my arm and took my money. And I owe that guy out there money for pot, but I don't have any money, and he wants to beat me up because I can't pay him. She said, well, how much do you owe him? And he told her. She said, oh, that's no problem. I'll just go down on the highway and I'll be right back. And then she turns to the waiter, and she goes, give him a hamburger and a coffee. And the waiter goes, no, I know. So she puts money she put money on the counter. She goes, there's my money. You got to serve me. And he did have to serve her, actually. So she goes out, comes back, has some words with this little guy out there. Oh, no, that's what happened. Comes back and comes in, gives him the money. The kid comes in, screams again. So she said, oh, why don't you leave him alone? He said, listen, I could pick up that telephone and make a call, and there'll be a carload of people down here in 20 minutes. And she said, I always forget this part. She said, I could pick up the phone and make a call, and there'll be 2 cars down here in 10 minutes. Anyway, she gives the kid the money. The kid gave the guy the money. That was the end of it. But that was the first time I saw Marsha P. Johnson.
That's great.
Yay.
The carload part wasn't in the book. I love that.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've talked to Jimmy so many times about that moment, and that's the first time and it's so powerful. This is what I mean at the beginning. It's like, Steven, you create this kind of landing place for people to share parts of and have access to parts of their memory that otherwise wouldn't be received. So
yeah. Well, and my interview I did with the Hot Peaches in 1977.
Yeah.
For Gays Week, a great early gay publication. That was my first published piece. So I have a very special feeling about the Hot Peaches, and then to be coming back, all these decades later and interviewing them in a different context, it was really extraordinary.
Let me ask, I want to ask Tourmaline, because we've had a chance to see just that one clip, but to hear a little bit, about Hot Peaches in particular. I wonder, how has learning about Marsha's collaborators shaped the way that you talk about and document her life?
Yeah, I was lucky to meet Jimmy like 15 years ago at Judson Memorial in the West Village. And I remember Jimmy did a poem that he had written, Spirit Change for a Dying Queen, in Marsha's voice. And then we kind of like struck up an acquaintanceship, and then he was in my film Happy Birthday, Marsha. And then we did a performance together over the course of a few weeks at the Kitchen. And it was really just so powerful to be like in a performing with such a luminary, and someone who, similarly to Steven, holds so much memory and moves with the spirit of generosity and across, generation or experiences. And so it's really shaped how I think about performance and my own kind of ethics and ethos around it, for sure.
That's beautiful. I think that actually really, to me, that moves us really well into a question that I wanted to ask about how these archives, and in particular, how it matters right now. I love that you've talked about the spirit of generosity and what that does. I think that's not necessarily what people expect as what we need in a moment like this, when everything is so fierce. And we've talked a little bit about already that trans lives, the histories, archives in general are under attack, but especially trans people. So why do the archives matter like this, but also why does that kind of approach that you're talking about of the archivist and of the living memories of people like Steven and Jimmy matter at this moment?
Well, I mean, I just want to underline the importance of capturing the people that are being canceled and erased, and perhaps will be more erased in the future. We don't know, but it's definitely a vital moment, and it's important, as I said before, for people to be able to access this material now. And I should mention the artifact site. To go there, it's www.artifacts.movie, or on YouTube, it's artifacts_movie. Either way, and being able to just see that things were not always like this. I mean, I always feel that I've really benefited from growing up when I did, seeing the experimentation, and it's really important to pass that on to younger generations. I think there's potentially a lot of feelings of hopelessness, and I think it's really important to see examples of how to get out of hopelessness and how to take action, to see the spirits of people. It's not programmatic, but it's psychological.
Maybe this is a good moment to talk for the other clip from Augusto, because you're talking about the importance of preserving the lives of ancestors who were at risk of losing or who we've just lost. So let's hear this one.
And our time in the 60s, we caused a revolution, but it was really an evolution that took time, and that in our mode of dress, you stick to your guns, stay true to yourself and your culture, and it lives on. And it inspires people who will never come to New York or the Bronx, but know through the gadget the truth of how it lives.
Two things about that clip. Number one, that is Augusto's apartment. And it's not that he had put things out for display for me or for any occasion. That was thoroughly how he lived. And he rolled out a very humble bed on the floor. He took advantage of every space that he had. And his mentioning of the gadget is the computer and the internet, and Augusto resolutely does not want to enter that age. So that's a funny part of it.
Yeah, I remember when Augusto asked me for my address, and I gave Augusto my email address, and Augusto said, "What?" and it's just so beautiful because Augusto would also write me very long letters and leave me very long voicemails, and so there's just a really and I would just call Augusto up while I was writing the book, with whatever question, like hearing Steven interview Marsha about Macy's. Hey, Augusto, like, did you know this part? And Augusto had a story about that, and or like, what was, and then Augusto also clarifying some things, like, like Candy and Sylvia weren't necessary, just like clarifying the geography and the and the mapping was so helpful too, and hosting me and my sibling Che in Augusto's apartment, and just for hours just sitting there and talking, yapping it up and just with a similar kind of deep generosity. And I think that is what is needed right now.
Yes. And
That's-
Augusto is deeply missed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Let me call somebody else into the space who I know is deeply missed, and that's Miss Major, who's also recently lost. Do you want to say a few words about Miss Major?
Yeah, you know, Miss Major, such a luminary and legend, and you know, someone who was also a performer in Jewel Box Review, performed with Stormé, and was brought to the Stonewall for the first time by Stormé. And you know, I just think there's a thread of performance that is so important to identify in these moments when we can be feeling really hopeless, because art and performance has a great capacity to shift our interior condition, right? Like how we feel about ourselves and each other, and what you know, illuminate what we once thought was impossible is actually done before and is quite possible right now. And so Miss Major was just such a consistent example of that.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to sit with that for a minute, but
yes.
Yeah, and I also have other questions to ask. I think maybe we could just pivot a little bit to how you know, we can keep rotating back to how this touches with the importance of archiving, but also, Tourmaline, you've written the first full-length biography of Marsha P. Johnson and have studied her life for over 2 decades. Can you tell us what your research process looks like and how you navigate in particular, gaps and silences, but also contradictions? I love how you handle contradictions in the book, actually. So I'd love to hear you talk about how you made some of those choices.
I think contradictions are so important. You know, there was to talk about and illuminate. Steven wrote for the 1979 Village Voice article about the contradictions of Marsha starting the Stonewall Rebellion, but also being kept out of the bars on Christopher Street, right? The real kind of contradictions that we're navigating. Marsha was someone who you know, was navigating contradictions in terms of her memory and recall. She simultaneously remembered the exact song playing in the Stonewall bar on the jukebox when the police busted in. Marvin Gaye heard it through the grapevine, and this, you know, years later, talked about not being at Stonewall until much later, and Stonewall was. These are her words. Actually took place in August, and they moved the date to June, and she didn't really understand why they did that. Maybe it was for the school children. And so I just think that's really important and powerful and beautiful to know that memory is something that is not solid, that's not fixed, that so often also trauma affects our memory and shapes our memory. And so you know, there's a contradiction in remembering a moment that was lived by you, but is celebrated quite differently many years later, and that those celebrations don't include you. And so, you know, which Steven wrote so powerfully in the Village Voice article, and, you know, so much of that you know, interview with Sylvia also. And also, you know, Steven had to track down Sylvia. I loved the part where, like, you know, Steven went all the way up to Tarrytown there was a lot of legwork that was happening to make those interviews happen. And so, yeah, to me, I think those gaps in archives are so illuminating as well, right? Like the gaps of like whose stories are important to share and hold, and that's why artifacts is such an urgently necessary landing place for all of us who are looking to piece together the past. So yeah,
great.
Yeah, beautiful.
I just want to jump in with one more contradiction. In the article in the Voice, you know, Marsha was essentially homeless.
Yes.
And at the same time, she'd walk by a gallery where there was a Warhol print of Marsha, which was, for sale for a good deal of money. So there's this way of the capitalist society taking things over. And I can't help think about the musical which just opened last night, Jellicle Ball, on Broadway, which was a reimagining of the musical Cats, but it's as if it was reconceived as a voguing musical, which many people would not have known about were it not for the film Paris is Burning. So it's this funny thing where something started out as a high modernist poet, T.S. Eliot's verses, get turned into a somewhat schlockola big time musical, then transformed via Paris is Burning into another form, which the people that started voguing would never be able to afford to see.
Right.
So
And-
it's
Mhm.
that funny acquisition.
And and also with like the history of ballroom, artifacts is so important because Sylvia is recalling very early balls that she went to,
Yes.
and that in terms of like audio interview from about balls in the early 60s, like that's few and far between. Are you going to get an interview of someone who was experiencing early ballroom culture that you can just go onto a website and listen to? So I think the work is incredibly important. You don't have to pay to listen to someone who was present and there in artifacts about what it was like and the looks and so
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. Stephen, how do you imagine people using this? Like students, researchers, how and what kinds of projects or questions do you hope it makes possible?
I mean, I think it opens up, so depending on what you're interested in, it can open up so many things, and we've structured artifacts so that we direct people to other interviews that are associated with it, and with the sociograms you can see the connections to people. And most of all, I always think about this as introductions to people. This is not intended to be deep as much as to whet your appetite for knowing more. And one thing that's interesting about oral history, you don't go to oral history for getting exact dates. You don't go there for specific facts. You get impressions that are so important, the feelings, like the club names, like what they were playing, all of what seem like the ephemera of history, but are in fact very important to get the material side of it. And the feeling of it.
Yeah, like the joy in Sylvia's voice when she's talking about making food and sharing it with people during the occupation of NYU. I mean, you don't get that. That's what it's so powerful.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. And maybe this kind of it relates to another question that I know I wanted to ask you, which is like for people who are just starting out with archival research, whether it's students or independent researchers who want to do some archival research, but they don't know where to begin. So what kind of advice can you offer in terms of what kinds of archives are most accessible for people who are just starting out? Sometimes, like institutional archives might not be available or accessible to community researchers. What can you tell us about that? And then I promise I'm going to open up for some audience Q&A. I've got questions coming in, and I'm going to start feeding you some of those in a minute.
Okay. I mean, I want to say something about archiving, not just about using archiving, but everyone is capable of creating archives.
Yeah.
We have the materials. We have the recording materials. We have, it's all there. So I really encourage people to follow their own instincts about what they think is important to preserve. Doesn't take a lot of space to preserve these things. In terms of getting access to archives, unlike when I was working, where I had to go to Yale and get out the boxes, and there's so much that is now available online, and really finding aids are readily accessible, and I would just say, first of all, use the computer, and that can take you to the other places, and do original research, i.e., talk to people.
Right. Build the archive. Don't
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with artifacts, I feel the urgency. We're producing at least one 30-minute piece per month, which is a lot. But I feel the urgency is to be able to create the material and get that while people are alive. I need to think of the number of people that have died since we've interviewed them, and it makes me more grateful that we did that.
Yeah, me too. Tourmaline, do you want to add anything to that about where to start and what?
That was incredible.
Yeah. That's great. Fantastic. So I am going to pivot right now to, in fact, it turns out that one of the audience questions, the first one, was really close to what I just asked you. So I'm going to move to the next one that I have, which is, Tourmaline, how has archival work shaped you as an organizer?
Yeah, I was really blessed to, when I was working on whether it was like access to healthcare under Medicaid in New York, or access to welfare in New York City, or housing, to learn about the strategies of people who came before, like the Marshas, right, and the Miss Majors, but also to, when I was at Queers for Economic Justice, we made a film about our own experiences that BCRW, through Hope Dector's work, captioned and preserved. And to me, that it was a group of us who were either formerly or currently low income, coming together in the midst of it to share experiences and strategies with each other. And so that really informed our organizing, our campaigns, the way that we felt about ourselves in a powerful way, in that interior way. So yeah.
Oh, wait, that's great. That's a great example. I want to ask Steven, how did you decide or know? What was important to save? And who was important to interview? I know you had to make choices about this.
You make all kinds of choices. But the main thing is more is better. I've always, initially, my interviews were related to the books I was writing. But then I thought, what are the things that we really should capture? For example, I went to Harlem to interview as many of the older Harlem people to get that kind of
Mm-hmm.
reporting. Um, uh, Whenever I thought someone seemed to me very interesting. I mean, one of the first people I interviewed on video was Quentin Crisp,
Mm.
um, who is a real pioneer, and he was 90 at that time. But there was a real sense this must be captured. The first interview, and it's timely in a way. There's a woman named Beatrice Wood, whose life went back to the teens in New York, and
Wow.
she was very close to Marcel Duchamp and New York Dada. The Marcel Duchamp retrospective is opening this week, so uh, a sense of, number one, who intuitively seems interesting, who
Mm-hmm.
is connected to something outside of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Are they witnesses? Are to things? Maybe they are not so important as a creator, but they've witnessed things. Um, and
Yeah. I was going to ask whether the sociograms that you've created helped you to then target other people to interview.
oh yeah. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
sociograms are a wonderful way of, when you talk about how does archiving affect your organization. Uh, Sociograms are a wonderful way of organizing the sense of social groups and
Mm-hmm.
where things lead, and who knew who, and they reverberate with each other, I think.
Great. That's cool. So I have an audience question that I'm gonna pivot back to, but I want to first start to follow something up with you, Stephen,
Yes.
and I'm gonna pull you into the same thing, Tourmaline. But you talked about what you try to get. Are people usually willing to talk with you, or how do you try to help people get past if they have reluctance to share their stories?
Okay. Can I go first? First of all, I think at least 50% of the effectiveness of the interview happens before the interview begins,
Mm.
because it's really about creating some kind of sense of relationship and expectation, and communicating that you are sincerely interested, and that you know enough of what they're talking about, so so that when you go into an interview, I don't find people are difficult to get to talk. That is rarely a problem. I think we are in an age where we are not listened to enough. Uh,
Right.
there's a great thirst for being able to listen to be able to talk to someone that wants to listen.
Mm.
I think my 20 years as a mental health clinic psychologist certainly helped, but it's not a lot. Uh, I think
Mm-hmm.
I think what's most important is to communicate to the person that you are listening in a deep way, that you are hearing what they're saying, that you give them space to take a question where they want to go,
Mm-hmm.
because people know what the good stories are. They know what they want to talk about. They know where the gold is. and you're really helping to shape that and give permission. I think
Right.
that's a major part. My interviews, there's very little about kind of getting people to reveal things they don't want to reveal.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tourmaline, I know you have a lot to say about this too, because you've really built very deep relationships. Can you talk about what you do, how that has worked in your work?
Yeah, I think it's just showing up kind of consistently over a period of time. But I think Steven just, if I was a student, I'd be, absorbing what Steven just laid out, exactly how to do it. And, I think it's so real that so many people right now don't feel listened to. And so providing that space to share is so crucial.
True. That's great. I know there's an audience member who was asking what skills are important for oral history collection, and you just heard the first set of them, which is to really cultivate yourself as a true listener, right?
Right.
Yeah. And I want to say one other thing about, again, a contradiction. As an interviewer, you are inviting people to communicate with you in the deepest, most caring way.
Mhm.
Often at the end of the interview, you leave their life.
Yeah.
And I try to follow up by at least responding afterwards about how important it was. But there is that thing that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it different for you, Tourmaline? I know you've also really tried to hold people over time.
Yeah, I think when I'm interviewing, well, it's one kind of common thread is a lot of the people that I interviewed for Marsha are immaterial, right? They're now transitioned to not being in their body. They've died. They're, in that kind of spiritual realm. So there isn't that kind of same level of access and connection as there was when we, I'm not getting voicemails from Augusto anymore, or Miss Major. It's so interesting. The two of them out of anyone left just consistently all the time, the longest voicemails on my phone. And so, yeah, I think that it goes back to Steven's point of, talking to people in the now, and making sure that we're having those kinds of conversations. And then also, I think for me as a community organizer, it was about talking to the people who, we were kind of in the midst of the mess of a thing, showing up with each other and passing the camera, on BCRW's site is the first, film that I helped make with Kagendo Marungi. It's Taking Freedom Home. We talked about it a minute ago, but that was like, we saw each other like every, Tuesday. Some days we were like thrilled to see each other, and other days we were like, I wish I was not here right now, something else. But it was a kind of thing of showing up all the time. So yeah.
And I think, somebody has asked in here that appreciating the idea, saying they love the idea that everyone is capable of creating archives, and asking what advice you'd give to people today who want to create and preserve their own ephemera, despite queer historical erasure. I'm going to combine that with something else too, which is the ways in which, we can hear, like what I heard you're talking about, Steven, in terms of you have somebody really open up, and most times then you're gone, you're not in their life, right? And thinking about how do we find ways to do this, what methods, what tools do we cultivate? And I say we because I've also been engaged in a lot of deep oral histories. I haven't done it for a while, but I have, to make sure that we're not extracting from people and participating in that in some way. And this is a real community archive project, and your work, Tourmaline, is very much feeding back into the communities that you're working with. But so this notion, if you want to say more about somebody who wants to really create their own archive, what do you advise them?
I first of all, to think about what are they most interested in?
Mm-hmm.
What either it can go subject wise, what are they interested in, or who are the people around them? Who are the people that they have access to that they can contact? And you really have to be have some guts to take the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always someone that usually approaches with written communication and then saying, I'm going to call.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly with older generation, the idea of receiving a cold call and say, I want to interview is not a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think old-fashioned manners are very important. And that also goes for post-interview. It's really important to express the appreciation. As I said, there's an inevitable thing of I'm in your life and now I'm gone. It's important to be aware of that, and to follow up in a humane way.
Mm.
I always, with my interviews, I always say that I'm happy to give a copy of the interview to them, for their family or for themselves. And I do think that's both a really nice thing to do and really valuable, because what I produce is, professionally created something that they would not otherwise have.
Yeah, I'm wondering if either of you have ever had somebody say to you that they wanted to remove something from the record of the interview, or for a sec.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you handle that for folks, and what is it?
I'm totally open to that.
Right.
I mean, absolutely.
Right. I mean, I think it's important for people who are just learning to realize this isn't like a news interview where somebody commits to going on the record and you have to,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you don't want people to have to be thinking all the time about, if I say this, how is that going to, I think it's very important for people to have control over their own words.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, with the film Taking Freedom Home, we worked on it for 3 years, from 2007 to 2010, and people's genders changed, their names changed, their expressions changed, their stories changed. So it was really important, with that we made sure at any point, like if you want to appear or not appear, or if you want to, there's just, it's so important to, self-determination.
Yeah. And I would underscore now in particular, because people face very particular kinds of risks, and they face different risks depending on where they are and what kind of networks they're embedded in and all of that stuff. So it takes great care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if I don't see that we've got additional audience questions right now, but I wonder if, we have a couple of more minutes. We can probably just end on time, but I'd love to hear any other things that you'd love to add that you didn't talk about. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. There was one more, but I'd like to hear let me ask the last question and then prepare for final reflections. How about this? what do you think is a good balance between having physical media archives, but having digital archives for accessibility? So is this something that you just want both across the board, or how do you balance that?
Of course, I love both.
Mm-hmm.
I love digital in the sense that it's available widely, and more, I think it's important for many people, not just specialists, to be able to see things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to become more siloed. We don't want to become more, going towards a narrow academic area. But that said, I love ephemera.
Yeah.
I love physical things. But this is an issue with archives, with digital media. Archives are primarily, at this point, paper oriented. And of course, people don't communicate on paper anymore. And I think there's a major shift that has to come to adjust to our present way of communicating. If we collected the number of written letters that people sent, it would be a very sparse representation.
Well, I think this is a good time to turn to our wrap up and just is something else you'd love to add before we close out?
I want to be clear that even though I'm really talking for my team in terms of Artifact, in terms of the production and the social media, the way of making people aware of what you have is a very, very important part that I would never have known as well as Will Markarian-Martin, who is my peer in the group. Also, I just want to say, it's wonderful to work with younger people because there's so many things that is they know just as a matter of course.
That's great. Tourmaline, how about you? Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah. I think that artifacts and the work of Steven and the team around it are just like what we should be tuned to right now. And it's so thrilling to hear people's own voices in written words about parts of their lives that, they're eagerly sharing that maybe that is the only time that piece of history was preserved. Whether it was Sylvia talking about Bickford's Diner in the 60s as a place for trans and gender variant, gender nonconforming people to hang out and the level of violence that people were facing, or Marsha singing the trolley song, or Jimmy talking about when I Marsha said, I'll call people in 10 minutes, there'll be 2 cars, which I hadn't heard before, And so I think it's just really an important thing, especially in this landscape that we're navigating right now, where we're simultaneously having our stories kind of erased, in real time. But there's more resources if we're kind of tuned to them. So,
yeah. Well, I can't thank both of you enough. Stephen, I have been blown away by learning about artifacts, and I'm so moved by and impressed by the work that you've done for decades. And I can't, wait to do even more digging than I've already done. I did some, and it's so fun and enlightening, and it's amazing. So thank you so much for sharing your work and your process with us tonight. And Tourmaline, it is always a joy to be in any kind of space with you, and to hear how you in particular have used this incredible resource. Helps a lot to know what we can do with it. So with that, I will thank everyone who joined us tonight, and thank both of you, and thank our ASL signers, Coffee and Michelle, again so much. And good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, everyone.